Hello everyone. This is chapter 9 from my contemporary romance novel Under a Namibian Sky. The knock on Naomi's door startled her away from the oblivion of dreamless sleep. Her book was lying upended on her stomach. The clock on the wall told her that she'd been asleep for an hour. The knock grew louder and more insistent. "Naomi, are you in there?" Auntie Elsa's voice held a note of panic, which was all the motivation Naomi needed to scramble off the bed and open the door. Auntie Elsa stood there, hair dishevelled, having been disturbed from her siesta. "Kerry has already called the flying doctor, but you need to go, now." "Why? What happened?" But Naomi knew. She just knew something had happened to Luca. Even as she spoke, she turned back into her room, shoved her feet into her desert boots, and grabbed the truck's keys from the bedside table. Auntie Elsa seized her arm. Together they ran down the long corridor through the kitchen to the truck parked just outside the kitchen door. Naomi had to move at Auntie Elsa's slower pace, even though everything in her screamed to get to Luca's side instantly. It felt as though her breath was choking her, but she managed to get the words out. What happened? But before Auntie Elsa could answer, Naomi saw one of the anti-poacher guards leaning against the truck. He looked ashen with exhaustion. Sweat was dripping down his face and arms, and large wet patches under his arms and on his chest, together with his rapid breathing, all signs he had run here. Kerry was standing near him, with a large pitcher of iced water and a drinking glass. "Small sips, okay?" He nodded, and accepted another glass of water from her, gulping it down without a break to breathe. When he'd had his fill of water, he wiped his mouth on his sleeve and got into the truck. Naomi didn't wait any longer. She jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and skidded off towards the desert. The large cloud of dust behind the truck obscured Auntie Elsa and Kerry, who had remained standing by the kitchen door. Naomi had to raise her voice against the engine's noise and the vibration of the truck. "What happened?" The guard sighed. He was visibly exhausted. Like Otayan, he used her childhood nickname. "We found them, Nonna." "The poachers?" "Yes, the same ones from yesterday. They wore the same shoes. They killed another elephant." Naomi's heart beat in her mouth. "Go on." "We tracked them, Nonna, and we found them, but they are clever. It was an ambush." Naomi drove faster. She needed to hear what he had to tell her, but did she really want to know? She nodded, indicating for him to continue. The only word in her mind was Luca. "We fought them, Nonna. They fought hard, but there were more of us. But some of us got injured." She had to ask, "Is Luca one of the injured?" He continued as though he hadn't heard her. "And Pete got shot. He was bleeding a lot, but I got away and ran hard to get help." "When did you leave them?" The guard pointed at the sky. "When the sun was there, Nonna." Naomi calculated that almost 5 hours had already passed. Knowing how fast these guys could run, it meant she had nearly 20 miles to drive to get to Luca and the others. "Where did you leave them?" "The place with the iron trees, Nonna." Naomi grabbed the walkie-talkie from the seat beside her. "Kerry, come in." The device crackled into life. Kerry's voice sounded distorted and far away, but still easily recognizable. "I'm here, Naomi. Have you found them?" "No, not yet, but can you redirect the flying doctor to 20 miles east of Desert Lodge? They're near Gemsbok Vlei. Pete has been shot, and he's bleeding out." "Oh my God, is he okay? What about Luca?" "Don't know yet. I'll let you know when I see them." "Okay, anything else?" "That's it for now. But keep your walkie-talkie close, okay?" "Done. Gerard is on his way with the other truck to pick up the rest of the guys. I'll tell him to go straight to Gemsbok Vlei." Naomi felt grateful that Kerry had their backs. She was great anyway, but strong as steel in a crisis. Naomi stepped on the accelerator. Why couldn't the bloody truck go any faster? It felt as though they'd been driving forever when the guard tapped her shoulder. He'd seen them first. "There they are, Nonna!" He pointed slightly to the left. Even though Naomi couldn't see anything yet, she trusted the guard's sharper eyesight. She slowed, swerved left off the tracks she'd been following, and drove into the desert. When she was about 2 miles from them, Naomi could see the group of men walking slowly toward her. They were carrying someone on what looked like a stretcher, but she knew it was a makeshift one they'd produced from items found around them in the desert. It had to be Pitt lying on the makeshift stretcher. Everyone else was walking by themselves. She sighed with relief and drove as fast as she could. Meanwhile, she told Kerry to redirect the flying doctor and Gerard to their new position. Just as she stopped in front of the group of men, the flying doctor's Cessna plane could be heard flying closer. None of the guards had escaped the battle with the poachers without injury, but the poachers hadn't escaped injury or capture either. Their hands were bound and their feet tethered, just enough so they could shuffle forward. Desert Lodge's anti-poacher unit followed behind them, pointing guns at their backs. Both groups looked exhausted, dusty and dirty, with blood spatters over their faces and clothes. Now they were closer, Naomi could see she'd been right about Pitt lying on the makeshift stretcher. Even though she saw everything at once, her focus was on Luca. But she couldn't see him among the men. "Quickly, bring Pitt to the truck. At least he'll be in the shade. Where is Luca and Otayan?" An older guard, a contemporary of Otayan and someone Naomi had known since childhood, walked forward. "We had to leave them there, Nonna." Naomi's breath caught in her throat, and a sudden sweat made her body feel even more sticky and clammy than the heat of the sun could produce. Oh God, they'd left Luca behind. Why? Is he still alive? The guard saw Naomi feared the worst. He babbled, "No, Nonna, the guest man is with Otayan and 2 other guards. We had to leave them there because the guest man got knocked to his head. It was bleeding and Otayan said they had to stay there until he felt better." The guard had barely finished talking before a small sandstorm hit them as the doctor's Cessna landed nearby. The young man with the black doctor's bag and stethoscope around his neck, who came running from the Cessna, looked too young to be a doctor. But he was all they had. Naomi hoped he knew what he was doing. She explained the situation with Luca and Otayan and left the doctor to deal with Pitt's wound and the other injured men. The older guard jumped into the truck and gave directions to where they'd left the others. Naomi drove as fast as she could, praying all the while that Luca was okay. She didn't want to investigate why her heart was beating at 1,000 miles a second, or why her stomach was as tight as the string on a sand huntsman's bow. Instead, she focused on the potential disaster for Desert Lodge if anything happened to Luca. After travelling for over half an hour, the dark green of a line of trees came into focus. The guard tapped Naomi on the shoulder and pointed towards the left of the trees. She could just imagine what had happened. These dry riverbeds with trees growing on either sandbank could be dangerous places. Wild animals and poachers could hide there without anyone's knowledge, though not much escaped the Desert Lodge guards. They must have stumbled upon such a hideout. Otayan would have known someone from Desert Lodge would come by, truck or Cessna. As Naomi drove nearer, she saw Otayan and another younger guard on either side of Luca. He was barely walking, slumped between the 2 men. There was blood on the side of his head and his t-shirt. His head was lolling from side to side as he was jostled between his 2 supporters. Naomi drove as close to them as she could and jumped down from the truck. The 2 guards who'd accompanied her jumped down behind her. With her heart in her mouth, she approached Luca. Otayan and the guard supporting him stopped. Before she could say anything, Otayan explained that Luca had tried to join in the fight, even though he didn't have a weapon, and got struck on the side of his head by a poacher carrying a gun. She could only thank heaven they'd struck him and hadn't shot him. But Otayan confirmed her suspicion that the poachers had run out of bullets and could use their rifles only to strike. Stupid, stupid man! Naomi didn't know whether to yell at Luca or hug him. She focused instead on trying to remain as calm as she could. Gently, she touched his face. His head snapped up and he glared at her. Then he closed his eyes again and murmured, "Amore mio," before his head dropped back to his chest. The guards gently lifted Luca into the truck. Otayan held Luca's head and put a bottle of water to his lips. Luca's eyes flickered. He took a few deep draughts from the bottle, trying to hold it in place with his hands, but he was too weak. His arms fell beside his body. Slowly, Otayan lowered Luca's head onto a rolled-up picnic blanket Naomi had taken out of the safari compartment at the back of the truck. Between them, the 4 guards held another blanket to create as much shade for Luca as possible. Naomi grabbed the walkie-talkie and told Kerry what had happened. Kerry quickly relayed messages back and forth. The doctor would wait for them, but only if Pitt's condition didn't deteriorate. Otherwise, he'd have to come back for Luca after dropping Pitt off at the nearest hospital. Naomi drove back to the Cessna as quickly as she could. She didn't want to cause Luca more damage or discomfort, yet the urgency of the situation spurred her on. The 40 minutes before the aircraft came into view was sheer torture. Finally, she could see the men sitting in the shade around the small craft. Pete was inside the Cessna, lying on a gurney. While Naomi had gone to find Luca and Otayan, the doctor had assessed Pete's wound and given painkillers. The doctor had checked the other men, but apart from superficial wounds, no one else had been badly injured. When Naomi arrived back with Luca, the doctor carefully inspected Luca's head wound. Otayan and the other guards helped to get Luca into the Cessna. Then, despite Otayan's protestations, the doctor examined him and the guards that came with him and congratulated Otayan on the tourniquet he'd used so Pete wouldn't bleed out. Naomi gave the truck's keys and the walkie-talkie to Otayan and told him Gerard was on his way to help transport all the men to Desert Lodge. She knew she could trust Otayan completely. "There's water for everyone in the back." She waved to Otayan as she ran to the Cessna. He was already talking on the walkie-talkie and she knew he was arranging with Kerry to get the police out to Desert Lodge to deal with the poachers. The doctor had helped Pete and Luca to be more comfortable, but Luca still seemed out of it, barely able to open his eyes, much less speak. Naomi went to sit next to him and held his hand as they took off to the nearest hospital. She watched the Cessna's shadow following them on the dunes below. Her thoughts went around and around about what had happened between her and Luca the night before. It had been the best night of her life, but how quickly can it all change? Here was Luca, clearly in trouble. What would happen if she gave her heart to him completely, and then something happened to him? The scenario was already scary enough, even though the doctor had assured her Luca would be okay. What if anything terrible had happened to him? Would she be strong enough to handle it? All her life, people had been telling her she must be strong, that she was strong. But she knew otherwise. The scars on her heart of having lost her parents had not strengthened her. If anything, she was more sensitive, more vulnerable. It wasn't always true that the death of someone you love very much makes you stronger. Maybe it was true for some people, but not for her. And not for Auntie Elsa. She'd seen Auntie Elsa go through hell when Uncle Voter had died. Auntie Elsa's hair had turned grey practically overnight from the shock. It was clear to everyone they'd loved each other very much. Uncle Wouter always joked they should go together because he couldn't imagine a single second without his Elsa. Auntie Elsa said she felt the same. She always said they were forever soulmates. Naomi saw it. She saw how Uncle Wouter's death made Auntie Elsa softer, more fragile, less able to deal with the stresses of life. Naomi's heart was already telling her it couldn't beat for any other man in the way it beat for Luca. There was no point denying it any longer. She'd known it last night and this morning, even though she was trying to talk herself out of it. The thought of losing him before she'd really found him hit her full in her solar plexus. Nausea travelled into her throat. Now, as she was holding his limp hand in hers, her silent tears wouldn't be contained and streamed unbidden down her cheeks. An ambulance was waiting when they landed. The paramedics loaded Pitt and Luca into the back. Naomi sat squeezed beside the doctor as he kept vigil over his patients during the short drive to the hospital. Once there, porters and nurses whisked the patients away. The doctor ran ahead of them, shouting instructions and orders. Naomi sat alone in a waiting room. After several minutes, she got up and found a phone to call Desert Lodge. She had to tell Auntie Elsa and Santina where they were, but she was exhausted. At the sight of Luca's bloodied head, it felt as though all the life in her body had left her. Despite what the doctor had told her, she knew head trauma could be very serious, and Luca had been so out of it, he didn't even realize she was there. He wasn't unconscious exactly, he just wasn't functioning. That couldn't be right. She wished she could locate the doctor. She needed reassurance that Luca was okay. It was a small hospital. Would they have the right equipment here to help Luca? There was nothing she could do but wait. She returned to sit in the waiting room. She should be concerned about Pitt too, but she couldn't think beyond Luca. Auntie Elsa had arranged with a neighbour who owned a Cessna to fly Santina to the hospital. Naomi knew Auntie Elsa would accompany Santina. There was no way she'd let Santina fly here by herself. Naomi sighed and leaned back against the wall. The plastic chair beneath her creaked as she forced it back on its hind legs. It was a comforting thought, knowing the two older women were on their way. But as she waited, her thoughts once again turned to Luca. Today's events, if nothing else, had proved she absolutely couldn't give her heart to Luca. She just couldn't chance it. No. Much better to suffer for a little while when he left. She would eventually get over him, wouldn't she? Rather that than to live a life with him in the full knowledge she'd lose him to death one day when she loved him more than life itself. She wouldn't be able to go on living without him then, she knew. It would break her utterly. By the time Auntie Elsa and Santina arrived, Naomi had decided. Her resolution set in stone. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for liking and sharing my videos, and thank you so much for subscribing. I really, really appreciate it so much. Thank you. Until next time.